welcome everyone. It's really amazing to see everyone who has joined. Please use the chat to connect and explore and share your thoughts as we discuss with each other. You are in the space called U4Earth Talks or University for the Earth. University for the Earth is a new project that is dedicated to, in the broader sense, to mainstreaming regenerative practices, regenerative entrepreneurship, and transition to regenerative futures. And we think that this is one of essential transitions that need to happen in the coming decades. That is a matter of survival in a way, a matter of survival and transition to possible more optimistic, more flourishing futures for all of us. And in the talk series, we are exploring work of people that already make this happen. People that are practitioners, people that are committing their lives, committing their efforts to find new models of engaging people, of changing human practices, of changing culture, also of learning together and creating some solutions for regenerative futures. And we want to make this series as practice-oriented as possible so that you, the participants, are inspired to maybe model some of the approaches. And we look forward to having fruitful conversation today in this space with our guest, Luis Camargo, that we will introduce in a moment. And before doing that, I would like to just share a few house rules, very basic ones. So whenever possible, please keep your cameras open. Maybe that's not the case for everyone, but we encourage you to do it because it's better that we have this sense of audience, even if we are online, but to feel and sense each other. We will have opportunity for questions after some initial conversation with Luis. So please prepare your questions. You can actually use a chat actively to comment, to make remarks about what you already see, maybe give references to some exciting work that you think parallels what is discussed here. And also to put your questions that will sort of inform the flow of the conversation today. So don't hesitate, don't wait, just throw it as it comes to you. This is an open learning circle. So this is a place where we hope that we will respect each other, we will respect our differences. But we come here in the spirit of collective learning, in the spirit of mutual understanding, and in the spirit of collaboration that can bring more positive futures for humanity and the Earth. So that's our main objective in bringing each other here. Welcome again, and I invite my co-host Kriton to say a few words and introduce our.
Welcome to our second U4Earth talk. This is in a way marathon that will lead to, at the end of it, to the big summit in this February, in the end of February, the summit of regenerative doers, of people that do regenerate regenerative businesses and the regenerative community projects in practice. They managed to go through all the hurdles and managed to bring the regenerative paradigm in the front line. So, Luis, I think that he will describe himself much better through his discussion, so I won't say much because there's not enough things to say of his work on his path to deepen regeneration, to educate people, to work with communities, to go in the field and find a way to bring this all in a coherent methodology and action for generation. But Luis will describe all that. I will start with a question, Luis. In U4Earth, we say that we want to release human creativity in order to mainstream regeneration by 2050. Why did you decide to release your own creativity for regeneration? Why did you pick regeneration?
Okay, so hi to everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here, seeing some familiar faces and some unfamiliar faces. But it's great to be here. Thank you for the invite. And I think more than picking regeneration, my answer would be that realizing I am regeneration. And I think part of it is, we think of knowledge and the pathways we choose as something that actually is chosen. And I think in many of the superficial elements in our lives, that is true. Nonetheless, when we realize that there are things that just are because we are, then choice is not a question. So I would say that, I am here right now because I had the realization, a deep realization that I am nature. And as nature, I am in alignment and in responsibility to create conditions for life to thrive. And if that is my greater purpose, all the minor purposes are just ways of going in that direction. So for me, regeneration is just part of the essential ways of achieving flow.
Luis, if you think about your journey, what actually, what got you on this path? So you started this more as an educator, and you sort of flown into much broader space, as I can imagine. So how was your journey happening? What OpEPA actually originally stood for, and how did it evolve?
Okay. Thanks, Pavel. So I'll go back because I didn't introduce myself properly. So my name is Luis Camargo. I'm based in Bogota, Colombia. So I was born and grew up in Colombia. Then I had the opportunity to study outside of Colombia in the United States and brought in some of my horizons of thought and relations. So I think it all comes from what I would answer when people ask me, what are you? And I always would say, I'm confused. And for me, confused is confused in a good, creative and generative way. So I went to school to study mechanical engineering with a minor in communication graphics. Throughout my engineering degree, which, I loved, and I loved the knowledge around it. I graduated with honors, so I did well. But throughout this process, I realized that, I did not resonate necessarily with the form of expression after, while doing my internships and stuff like that. What was close to me was more the creative aspects of communication and creativity. So I applied for another degree in arts, and I was accepted to the Master of Fine Arts in computer animation and design. So I moved from engineering to arts. Fortunately, I had my parents, which were, tight in the sense that they definitely were weary, but at the same time, they asked good questions. And they helped me commit to whatever I was doing. So when I said, engineering, I don't think is what resonates, they said, okay, so think of what resonates, but you're committed to finish one process. And I did finish it. And then they opened the space for me to choose and move forth. When I moved to the art school, obviously I was moving from, one type of thinking, left brain, very logical, very structural, where I focused on systems, engineering and stuff like that, to a very creative and loose world, very, right-brained. And I think that was the success. So when I say confused is, I mean holistic. I mean open to explore many vantage points and many perspectives. So I think this process really molded and forced me to look at things from many different vantage points. At the same time, my interest for nature and my interest for environmental and social issues led me to read a plethora of authors from the East, from the West, from indigenous communities, from all kinds of walks of life. And that was just, let's say, the nutrients that fed into this whole thing. So this is the context of my confusion, because after that you start confused and you walk through life with an open heart and ready to explore and discover, instead of thinking that you have certainty and you walk through life thinking you know. So I think this is a big shift that happened to me. And if we go back to when I was a younger kid, my family definitely was a family that came from working on nature, in nature with agricultural and agro industries and work in Colombia. So when I was a little kid, I had a lot of time in nature, in productive farms, but most of the farms had many protected areas and forests and streams and other things. So ultimately, I think I spent great amount of time outside, great amount of time in nature. And that really built up this idea within me of becoming more an explorer of life, an explorer of our planet. And it helped me really connect deeply and fall in love with the earth. So I think that was another molding factor that was really important. So when you put these three things together, you start seeing that, having this deep connection through the time I was growing up, having a family that supported, being good at whatever you did, but with an open mind to choose whatever resonates within you, and then allowing you to shift from one side to the other opposite side, really served as the foundational elements to what I'm doing right now. Okay, so looking at how OpEPA started, and this is a story that kind of closes this journey, in the sense that, I moved from engineering to arts, and as I was finishing my Master of Fine Arts, I did a thesis focused on the heart attack. It was called Earth's Heart Attack. So it's an animation that really brought in the significance of the isms. So capitalism, all the isms, whatever ism you can find, and what the isms mean to Earth's vitality and health. And I realized that, as we added more isms to our ways of thinking, we actually created what I thought and believed as heart issues in our planet. So the animation actually went from a heart that was healthy, full of vitality of nature systems, to human systems, and all the isms kind of combining, and the heart speed up until it actually had a heart attack and ceased to operate, so lost its vital capacity. But the thesis was really looking into, how our ways of thinking and our ways of being had led us to this rupture of relationships between humans and nature, and the importance of humans and nature reconnecting, or realizing that nature is really not humans and nature, but it's humans as nature. And this is a dichotomy that I think is pretty much the root cause of much of what we see today in terms of our poly crisis. And in this process, I did, go to look for work, because even though I was thinking this way, in my way of learning and acting, I had to look for work. This is in 1991. And I had scrapped engineering, so I went to the visual arts in Colombia to look for work, and I found that the only application for creative arts in that, let's say, more pioneering structures were advertising, selling things and creating, 3D animation to sell things that people didn't need and people didn't have the money to, pay for. So in my mind, I came into another crux, which was thinking that, creativity put into that industry, or those industries, was really prostitution of creativity. So I decided, that's not for me. So imagine my situation. I'm 23 years old, after going to school, being supported by my family, so I can build a capacity to put that knowledge to work, to build for myself and, a family of my own. And then the first one didn't resonate with my heart. The second one, prostitution of creativity. So I was in a crux in terms of what can I do now? And I took, a little of inspiration from, North American indigenous communities and some of South American indigenous practices. And I, created this vision quest for myself that was a bit in isolation, with yoga, with meditation, with all these practices I kind of brought in together. And as a result of a 10-day fast, and with this whole situation, I realized, that my purpose was really to bring and create opportunities for others to fall in love with life and with earth, as I had fallen in love with life and the earth. So for me, it was surprising, because even though knowledge and academics and everything I had learned was on the forefront, what emerged was this deep connection I had with nature and the opportunities that had led me to connect. So that's where actually the birth of OpEPA came in 1991. And from there, I was, with many questions, because I had knowledge in the engineering field, I had knowledge in the arts field, but I had no knowledge or no formal training in education, in environmental, whatever. So I had no context. I only had my adventures to push for. But I realized that every time I went out with people to nature and shared, the process I lived in nature, there was one moment where people changed. And I used to call this the moment of the shining eye, because I would see people moving through in maybe discomfort in nature, maybe sometimes fighting with whatever devils they had inside. But always at a certain point in the day, I would see these individuals sitting down and looking maybe at the horizon, at a river, at a sunset, and suddenly an opaque eye would shift to a shining eye. And I realized that was the point, that was the moment. And that is the moment where the hearts open, where the moments, let's say, what I would call now transcendent experiences occur. And those are the moments where we open windows to learn from a different perspective, from a different place, where your heart blends into nature and you realize you are nature. So I committed myself to really working to learn more about the environmental field, to learn more about education. I pushed a lot of my personal experience in terms of expeditions and wilderness travel to synchronize with learning on how I can share this with others. and how I can share it safely. And that led me to becoming a wilderness educator with the National Outdoor Leadership School in the United States. So I learned how to become a mountaineering instructor, a sea kayaking instructor, a whitewater rafting or kayaking instructor, expedition kayaking instructor. So I really explored all these options. At the same time, I was working in Colombia with the Colombian government in different environmental fields. I was part of the team that helped create the environmental ministry in Colombia and to set forth many of the ideas that then started, let's say, building the environmental structures in Colombia. Unfortunately, those structures quickly told me that that was not the place for me and reaffirmed that we needed to create something different. So I was in the Ministry of Environment, in the National Planning Department, and for different reasons, I felt I was pushed out of that system. And that's when I traveled for a year in South America, reconnecting to the Andes and to indigenous communities and to national parks, and reaffirmed my intention. At that point, I met a couple of people that actually resonated with the idea of OpEPA, and we created OpEPA with 4 individuals as founders, one being my brother, and then 2 colleagues, one that I traveled with through South America, and we had a lot of time to speak, and another individual, Catalina, who was a biologist, a field biologist, and had a lot of time with nature. And I guess what really connected us is that we all had those experiences in nature that transformed us. And we realized the importance of reconnecting to nature as a key component of change.
Luis, just really curious about if you think about this transcendent experience, what are maybe just to kind of give an illustration, a couple of things that really, a couple of these 1 or 2 experiences where they felt really getting transformed or seeing a group of people being transformed.
Okay, I'll start with me. So there's a couple, and I would say, you know, I had the opportunity to be in the Colombian Himalayan team climbing throughout the world. But I remember myself standing in North Rongbuk Glacier, so on the skirts of Everest. And I'm talking standing maybe at 6,500 meters above sea level. So Everest still, 2,000 meters higher. So you're still looking at a mountain that is incredible. It's surmountable. It's humongous, but you're very high, higher almost than any other place in the world. But standing in this place and looking up, but also feeling where I was standing, I melted into the glacier. So this is a transcendent experience because it's an experience where you in your, let's say, egocentric hugeness shrivel into an ecocentric collectiveness. So the only way to expand is to become the earth where you're standing. And your body does that. It actually realizes that thinking of yourself as this, autonomous, huge being doesn't make sense. You're really just part of something that is much larger than you. So you shrink and become part of nature. So for me, the mountains and the forests have had this effect. With other people, I remember one day we had some programs, and I'll tell you a little bit about our focus, but we had a program where, after a full day walking, moving through the different altitudes towards the high altitude in Colombia, to the Paramo, which is maybe a high altitude tundra, a wet tundra ecosystem. And we reached this ecosystem always trying to connect moments, because we realized that, to create transcendent moments, you need a couple of things. You need, first of all, knowledge to understand from the mind, but you need experience direct experiences to understand from the body. And you need the capacity to process emotions and to surface them, to process or to experience from the heart. So you need mind, body, and heart, those three things together. And then you need, or actually, you're enabled, or the windows of opportunity actually are brought by nature, by seeing specific, let's say, moments where nature just plays its part. So this time we walked throughout the whole day, hard conditions, hard inclines, very physical, to this place where you could see the sunset in the horizon. But as the sunset was coming down with spectacular colors, the clouds shining, there is a hummingbird that flies to one of these frailejones, which is one of these endemic plants from this ecosystem. And you see the hummingbird feeding in the shining of the sun setting. And all the students just stand there at awe. So I think transcendent moments are very much related to awe that is supported by mind, body, and heart, in the sense that everything aligns, and aligns in such a way that nature just opens that magical door into, feeling an integrated knowledge. And that's why I think, mind, heart, and body are so critical, because it's synchronizing all our capacities to sense the visible and the invisible in order to experience those moments where we shrink and blend or melt into, our living environment.
Luis, you mentioned a bit about students, but your work focuses a lot on the youth, on the younger generation. Is it because they are more open to this feeling of awe when they are in nature? Why did you work so much with youngsters, and how do you design these programs so that they get the best of regeneration in the heart to turn it into action once the program is over?
Okay, so first question, why youth? And when we started, actually, the OpEPA's mission is to reconnect people to the earth in order to accelerate the transition towards sustainable and regenerative cultures. So it's really not only youth. Nonetheless, when we started, our focus was youth, because we realized, especially in Colombia had, 1990s, at the end of 1990s, we're in the peak of a very complex political and social moment in the country. Nature was totally forbidden because of safety reasons. If you moved out of cities, you would meet with, the risk of being kidnapped. We had the highest kidnap rate of the world at that time. So people would not leave cities if they lived in cities. If you lived in towns, as you walked out, there were anti-personal mines throughout any wilderness area and places around it. So people in villages were not coming out either. So there was a really big restriction of having access to nature. And we were thinking, if part of the issue is reconnecting people to nature and to the earth, we really need to break the bubbles that are being generated in terms of experience. So we really focused on how to break the bubble of those individuals that were born in the city and had no access to nature and to seeing nature in different ways, and how to empower those in rural areas to find ownership and sense of belonging to their land. So these were the two contexts. And children were definitely, I guess, the group of people we felt needed this the most, because they were growing and developing in a way that their system was definitely disarticulated from nature and the earth. So we wanted to reconnect with them. So that's how we started with them. And in terms of we started working with experiential learning and outdoor education and environmental education, kind of fragmented, but realized that in this process of generating experiences, that really touched the mind, touched the body, and touched the heart. And actually later we added the hands because action needed to come to it. So it's a more integral. We started developing the idea of a different focus, which we call nature-based education from a relational perspective. And this is kind of what we're really pushing right now in terms of trying to get people to understand and embrace. And through the IUCN, which is the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, we have launched a global initiative of nature-based education. And we can speak of that later. But the idea here is really the following, and I'm going to share my screen for those that can see it. In a second. Give me a second. Sorry.
You want to share your screen?
Yeah, I got it. So what we have evolved to is understanding that learning, first of all, nature-based learning, comes from bringing nature to the center of education and the learning experience. If we are nature, nature is where we learn the most, the best, the most deeply, the most integrated or entangled. And second, we need to bring the learning experiences also out into nature. So understanding nature as a learning environment, nature as a teacher, and nature as inspiration and knowledge. So this realizes that 3.8 billion years of learning that nature has definitely makes it the wisest of all beings on our planet. But bringing nature to the center also implies that we need to bring ourselves to synchronize and connect deeply with that knowledge, to open the access to that information. So the first, let's say, trunk in our forest of nature-based education is connecting deeply. And it has to do with moving from that sense of separation to a sense of familiarities, to a sense of building empathy and understanding empathy, not from social empathy, so from the empathy with others, humans only, but starting to moving with empathy with others more than human, and then deep empathy with all life around us. And that brings us to really moving towards those moments where we can, like I said, melt into nature and realize our interbeing. So this process needs to occur. And obviously it starts from a separation, a big separation in some cases, and this is the process we do until we are nature. So this is the first trunk in the learning experience. Then the second trunk is what I call awakening the naturalist within us. And this comes precisely from that sense of being confused. So I realized that if we look at history and the most influential individuals in history in terms of human knowledge and human experience, naturalists play a really big role in this process. And naturalists like Humboldt or Darwin are individuals that actually were not only natural scientists, they were confused themselves. They were astronomers, they were artists, they were engineers, they were a bit of everything. So this brought me to the idea that the ultra specialization we're leading today in education is actually one of the let's say pathways that has brought us to the sense of separation. So we need to come back to a more generalist and multi-knowledge experience. And in this process, I was wondering, if I put myself in the feet of Humboldt or Mutis or any of these explorers, what was it that made them realize so many things. You know, Galileo and Da Vinci, you know, they were incredible. And I realized that there was one particularity that we have lost, is that, yes, they were masters of the visible in many areas, but they had keen capacity to observe the invisible. So the key in deep learning has to be looking at the invisible, not only at the visible. And our current education system is really focused on the visible, but we have forgotten the invisible. So awakening the naturalist within us is really enabling the capacity to learn how to sense the visible and the invisible. And within the invisible, I include, you know, the capacity to sense the vitality in the energy fields of spaces, of systems, relational systems, and to be able to perceive energy flows, interactions, and quality of those interactions. And in order to do this, you know, I found that really stimulating awe, curiosity, discovery, the capacity to observe in silence is really important. So you can connect deeply, but you need to awaken a really broad capacity to sense the visible and the invisible in order to learn deeply. Okay, so you connect deeply, you awaken the natural spirit within you, and then you start acting for regeneration. And this is where regenerative thinking really comes in, because I believe that as you connect deeply with yourself, as you connect deeply with others, and as you connect deeply with nature, and you activate the regenerative capacities that we have. But it has to be the three connections all the time. It is not one or the other. If you look at the current education system, many schools really follow the UNESCO guidelines and, you know, charter, where it says that there's two main columns: self and community and social. But nature is never there. So we're missing one of the key components that needs to be articulated to actually have that capacity to activate our regenerativeness. Now, that's the way I call it. And this is why acting for regeneration comes at this stage, because as you act, only if you're deeply connected, deeply empathic, and you're able to sense what's going around you in the visible and the invisible, will you be able to act and have the feedback loops necessary to understand if your actions are bringing vitality to systems or not, if your actions are becoming regenerative or degenerative. You know, that realization, in order to build coherence, really comes from that deep empathy and that sense of interbeing and that capacity to sense the visible and the invisible. So in our model, you know, we do these three things, you know, through different methodologies and processes. It's mostly learning journeys and community processes. But we also realized that this was not enough, because life is in constant motion, it's fluid. So we need to move towards what I would call nourishing the system. So if you look at a forest, we have three big trees, you know, deeply connecting, awakening our natural spirit, or sensing, acting for regeneration. And you have a canopy of leaves or a root system of mycelium that actually nourishes and continuously brings information that helps us connect deeply, that helps us learn how to sense better and sense, you know, more things, and helps us to act more coherently. So nourishing became a really important aspect of this process. And finally, when I was thinking about the nourishing component, I realized that, you know, a very easily overseen element was food. Food nourishes our bodies every day. It is our most intimate relationship with nature. So food systems became something really important in this process. Because if we look at it, you know, food systems in shifts or transitions towards regeneration really, if we transition food systems as a whole to conscious and intentional regenerative food systems, the whole of the way we inhabit the planet will change. Food systems are connected with everything, with the way we produce, with the way we transport, with the way we build communities, with the way we consume. It's all encompassing. So for me, nourishing became something not only inspirational to keep the energy flowing into the system, but also to realize that food needs to be one of the focuses that we have. And that brought me into, this space. And this is our system, really, looking at these 4 components and how you interact with these 4 in order to move towards, let's say, deep relational thinking. So if you look at relationships, and I'll show you a little, another little here. Like I said, it's moving into relationships where, okay, this failed. Start again. Where there is, a realization, and this realization has come, as we were discussing, the concepts of weaving, and we created the Weaving Lab, and I know, Pavel, you were part of this process. This is where the full realization of the need of having the relationship with nature present all the time. So these 3 relationships, self, society, our relationship to ourselves, which is, by the way, one of the fractured relationships we have in the world today, sense of purpose, the sense of value is being lost with a lot of what we're seeing today. And that is the increase in mental health issues and other issues associated to that relationship. Then our relationship with others and our relationship with nature. And if we look at this, these relationships are comprehensive. It's not only, in one aspect. It has to be relational, spiritual, cognitive, emotional, physical. So really has to be a holistic relationship that aims to build conditions for me to be, vital and be able to be part of creating conditions for life to thrive. In our relationships to others, same thing happens. And then our relationship to nature obviously manifested in many of the planetary issues we're seeing today. But beyond that, it has to do with the center and how all this connects. So when we connect the triangle of relationship, we activate what I call our regenerativeness or our regenerative capacity. And this comes from, that relationship between me and nature that allows me to become nature. So it enables our interbeing capacity, that capacity to be more. Our relationship with others that actually allows us to think ourselves as collective beings that could bring well-being not to the individual, but collectively, and then to nature at the same time. And then understanding the relationship between communities and nature and the role of diversity. Diversity, like if we look at nature, and really this is something that I've become very, accustomed to do, is asking the forest. So, especially in a country with so much polarization and conflict, one of the most biodiverse countries in the world, which is Colombia, and one of the most culturally diverse countries in the world. We have over, 24 linguistic groups within the country, over 86 ethnic groups. So it's incredible, geographically and naturally and culturally. And asking nature, what is diversity in nature? And you see, diversity is really not the reason for us to generate conflict, which is the way humans have represented it, in modern society. But diversity is actually the potential to evolve, to generate innovation, to generate resilience, to generate the capacity to adapt. So understanding in that relationship how diversity really plays a huge role in activating our regeneratives is fundamental, because I think that's one of the, hidden aspects that we're not really using. And as we move forward in many of our movements, we're actually, let's take, racial or gender or any other big social movement, is actually focused, especially the energy coming from North America, focused on separating, on dividing into myriads of divisions that we have to acknowledge. And I do agree we need to acknowledge diversity, but we need to embrace commonness. We need to embrace our common naturedness, because that is what will enable that potential of diversity as a source of innovation. And I think that is fundamental in the transition we're doing. So part of it is, within these relationships, understanding that regeneration is actually a movement. It's not a destination. It's not somewhere we want to reach. It's something we need to become. And in this process, we need to become or create the conditions for life to thrive. It's like Janine Benyus used to say, or says in the principles of living systems, life creates the conditions conducive to life. So this is the direction we need to move forth. And in order to move forth in this direction, we need to actually enable our capacity to be in right relation, like North American indigenous communities said. And if you look deeply, you'll see the same thing in African ancestral communities, in South American ancestral communities, in Asian ancestral communities. So this is one of the main principles that we can bring as wisdom from ancestrality, coming into right relation in all our relations. Our relation to ourselves, to others, and to nature is fundamental in this transition. So when we talk about nature-based education, is those things I mentioned of connecting deeply, learning how to sense, acting regeneratively, but always in the context of coming into right relation and keeping those 3 levels at minimum of relationships at hand. So in general, that is the framing.
If I can have a last question before opening up for questions for, I see also Alexander Laszlo has many questions already in the chat, but others also. So a last question for our side will be, first of all, I would like to intrigue people for future questions, like for questions in the Q&A session. Like Luis has worked a lot with indigenous knowledge, incorporating it into agroforestry practices, has worked a lot on biodiversity corridors in degraded lands and many other things. But Luis, why did you choose to be part of U4Earth? Which true connections led you in this project also?
I think the word that sums it up is resonance. So I think we need to feel, precisely sense the fields and find fields that are resonance and aligning into the direction of creating conditions for life to thrive. And I think, we cannot act in only one space. We need to act in multiple spaces. And I feel U4Earth, is definitely one of those initiatives. It's an initiative that is trying to create bridges between the way we are right now as society, human community, to the way that we have potential to be. So, that emergent reality that we can embrace if we actually move towards becoming nature once again. So for me, there are, many things or many actions we can engage on in the transitions towards regenerative cultures. And some are more in shifting the way we are, so embracing the emergent systems, let's say, but also we need to focus on the bridges that allow us to move from the present to the next step. And I think U4Earth is doing precisely that. It connects, the current business environment, the current innovation environment, bringing the idea of diversity and nature-inspired innovation into focus, and allowing individuals to actually think themselves from where they are to where they can become a little more. And as we embrace invitations to innovate in this manner, people will move from this first point to a second point. And in that second point across the bridge, you are different. You are becoming different. And that second point will give you a better vantage point to move to the third point, and the third, and the fourth, and the fifth, until you reach the emerging capacities that are, coming from you. So I do believe, we need to create the conditions. It's like fostering healthy soil if we want to, have some food growing that is nutritious and vital. It's fostering the soil, but also enabling the conditions for those plants to grow. And in this case, those plants are, those bridges of innovation in business and thinking that allow us to move to different ways that we can act and create. So, and maybe to finish, there is one thing that I'm gonna show you, because in that process, part of it is understanding how I frame regeneration. And for me, regeneration has, let's say, a superficial and a deep capacity. So I just want to share this with you, because that will give you a framing to understand. I believe, when we're working in regenerative transitions, we are very much focused, as with everything else, in what's visible. And what's visible is what's superficial, what I call superficial. So what's visible is what is outside, what we can see, what we can touch and change. So many times these are the structures, processes, and practices. So we see this in the transition towards regenerative agriculture, regenerative economics, regenerative finances, and all these other manifestations of regeneration currently. But we're forgetting, once again, the invisible. And the invisible is what I would call the deep regeneration. And this is inspired by, the work of Aldo Leopold, and thinking on superficial or shallow and deep ecology. But deep regeneration really is about understanding our ways of thinking, our ways of relating, and our ways of being. And unless we shift both simultaneously, the change will not happen, because shifting only what's visible under ways of thinking that do not shift, it's only putting bandages on top of a scratch. So the idea here is that as we can work to shift the structures, processes, and practices, we really need to work in education to shift, and in ways of learning to shift ways of thinking, relating, and being, because that's the only way we can move forth.
Amazing, Luis, and really, I think a lot to learn from you are trying to condense years of your journey into basically a few minutes of this conversation, but I'm imagining how this can be unpacked in real processes that you conduct, and that can be brought into learners can be brought into contact with. First, I wanted to highlight one aspect that you mentioned, maybe just to kind of give it a note, when you said that our purpose is to create conditions for life to thrive, and education can be part of that journey. And actually today we have as one of listeners to your talk, Valerie Hannon, who wrote the book Thrive, and Valerie is known as one of thought leaders in education, really inspiring a lot of educators around the globe. And she actually highlights exactly this, that the whole purpose of education is to learn how to thrive. And what you point now to is that we need to learn how to thrive by reconnecting with nature, because there's no other way. So that's why nature-based learning is so central. I'm just kind of making a note of this, because I think this idea is really, really important. And the question that I hold for you is I'd like to kind of bring one of the questions posed by Alexander Laszlo, but I want to a little bit expand it. So Alexander asked, was this idea of having food as one, and this idea of nourishing, was it inspired by South American movement of buen vivir, living in a good way? But you also mentioned the ancestral traditions of Southern America that informed your work. So maybe you could comment on both whether buen vivir was part of your inspiration and whether what kind of essential ideas come from your connection with indigenous wisdom and your work with indigenous communities.
So coming from, engineering and arts actually has been a blessing because I never had the time academically to go into many other subjects. So I've learned empirically and through living and learning to teach many things. So I really came across Buen Vivir ideas at the same time I was building my ideas. So I would say that El Buen Vivir is part of the nutrients that feed the soil. And I think there are many parallels, but something I've learned is that right now in my mind, committing to any one model it's an oxymoron proposition, because ultimately what I learned in nature-based education is that, and this is one of the things I question to the education system, is that we need to use all the models. We need to use all the approaches. We need to use all the methodologies. It's not about, just becoming a specialist in place-based education or experiential learning or inquiry-based learning. It's about using a little bit of everything, because we are a little bit of everything. So, and finding resonances and direction. So Buen Vivir definitely is an inspiration, and I relate with a lot of the people engaged in El Buen Vivir, but I do not commit to any determinate borders of El Buen Vivir or any other system. So I really want to see is the fuzzy borders, all the liminal spaces between experiences that allow us to synchronize and to resonate in a way that allows us to move in the direction of, being in right relation and creating conditions for life to thrive. Because if our constant journey of learning is not about learning to do that, then we're really not in the process of learning to live, learning life. So if we look at ecosystems and how they learn, that's how they learn. They learn to create new ways. And obviously they make mistakes. They take paths that are not conducive for life, and they learn and they correct. So this is what I'm saying. It's actually about being to inhabit all the fuzzy areas and inspire with everything that's out there in order to find resonant strategies and resonant learnings that allow us to move in that one common direction with all living systems.
Thank you, Luis. I guess I would have a myriad more questions, but I'd like to now to open up to invite our participants to ask more questions, if you have any, after listening to this really inspirational talk. You can also please lift your hand, either visually or by using the button, and we'll give you an opportunity to speak.
Well, if there's no big questions, that brings to my mind the idea of the contradictions, because we do learn from mistakes, but not only that, we are a mistake in itself, in the sense that if we wanted to think ourselves as regenerative beings, we're not. At this moment, we're speaking through a mechanism that's using energy, that's using metals, that's using plastic, that's, we are a contradiction in ourselves. And I think this has been the paradigm of the environmentalists that has maybe frozen us. because we fall into the visible act of, trying to find the morality of where we are. And it's not about where we are. If we're vegan, if we're not, if we're, dressed in this or that, or what we're doing. Because, even if you're naked standing in the middle of a field, you're generating greenhouse gases. So we are part of this system itself. But we need to learn to be conscious and aware of the contradictions that reside within us, and understand that it doesn't matter where we are really. It matters is how we're moving. And this is why that concept of direction is so important to me, because, we might be here right now, but the question is, how are we moving? How are we moving individually, collectively, and how are we influencing others to move? And I think this is the process of activating our regenerative capacities, really the direction of movement within the dualities that we inhabit. So understanding and not finding that dualities to create pain, but our dualities to create learning and to move forward into a more regenerative ways of being.
I don't know if Alexander, Laszlo, Alexander, you have written a lot of questions. I don't know if you would like to take the floor and have this dialogue with Luis.
And great
Luis,
to see you, Alex.
No, good to see you too. I don't remember all the questions I asked. They're in the chat. I don't know if you as facilitators can capture them and pose them. That'd be great, but I appreciate what you're doing, Luis, as you know.
Yeah, there was one question, Alexander, that you posed originally and kind of repeated it, which sort of comes to the central idea expressed by Luis, that we are nature. And you said, yes, there is. So let me ask the question for Alexander, and we'll bring you back after that. So Alexander asked, what if we are nature, where do we begin and where do we end in this process of learning?
Okay, I'll hit it first, and then Derry, I'll take yours. So I think it depends on the vantage point you take. We begin and we end only if we have a border that we define. And that border is defined by us. It's not defined by anything else than us. So if we look at quantum physics, clearly, it is scientifically proven that we do not have that defining border. It's a perceived border. So the same with these ideas. Where do we begin? Where do we end? We just transform. So if we look at it from that perspective, we do not have a beginning or an ending. We're just in process of motion and transformation. Nonetheless, if we move it to a more fragmented way of thinking to understand it, and we build in a little more reductionist, we can have many beginnings and many endings. And every portal between the ending and the new beginning becomes that rebirthing. But it all depends on what makes sense to each of us in our context and our culture. And this is why I really think that Daniel Wall's framing of regenerative cultures as a plural idea is so important, because we each have a context that is unique. And in that, we need to be unique. So that diversity and pluridiversity is fundamental. But obviously, that direction maybe is our commonness, and the commonness with living systems. So I hope that helps answer a little bit that question, Alex. Derry?
Yeah, and Peter Whitehouse has raised the hand. Peter, the floor is yours.
Oh, no, actually, first Derek was lifting the hand. First, please, Derek, go. And then
Okay,
Peter.
I didn't see that yet.
Can
Derek?
I?
Yes, please.
Okay. I'm from the UK. It was interesting that Valerie was on this call. We almost share a name, but not quite. I think certainly one of the things we've got to stop doing in my country is destroying our young people. We've created education systems which are quite alienating, based around memorizing knowledge and high stakes examinations. So we say to a third of our young people, having forced them through compulsory education for 11, 12 years, we then say to them, I'm sorry, but we designed an examination system which sends you out into the world telling you that you're failures. And we do this, we're almost eating our own children. And I was comparing this with a lovely film I saw yesterday called Patrick and the Whales. I don't know if you know this film, about a guy who is almost living with sperm whales in the sea around the Dominican Republic, building relationships with individuals so that they recognize him and come back to find him after he's been away for years. And there's a beautiful sequence where a mother of a sperm whale calf, the whale trusts, before the whale goes for a deep dive for food, it leaves its calf with a trusting other male, another adult that it knows, it trusts it to look after its calf while it dives. And there's a lovely moment where the mother whale dives, leaving her calf with this guy, Patrick, who's made the film. The whale actually trusts the human. And there's something tragic about this, because this pod of whales, 50% of them have actually been hunted and killed in the last 10 years. So these whales know that on the whole, human beings are not to be trusted, and yet the relationship is built of trust. It was totally beautiful, and it provided me with a model of how we should be treating our own young. We should be nurturing and caring for our own young in the same way that the whales care for theirs. And one almost fears for the whales in showing their vulnerability and trust to humans. Are we capable of handling it in a moral, empathetic, and caring way? I hope so. But I loved what I heard of your talk, Lewis, and I wondered what you had to say about how we can change the way we treat our own young people in our school systems.
Thank you, Derry.
And maybe because, Luis, there's an issue of time, let's take also the second question from Peter Whitehouse, and you can answer to both of questions, please.
So my question actually builds on that, because I work with intergenerational schools in Cleveland, Ohio. And my question, Luis, is as the meta crisis continues and we face increasing signals from Mother Nature about our irresponsible behavior, there will be severe health consequences for individuals and communities and ecosystems. So how do you see nature-based learning about health as perhaps playing an important role in your notion of the curriculums for the future? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Derry, and thank you, Peter. First of all, and I want to touch a couple of ideas that I think are critical. One, our educational system definitely is not providing what we need. Clearly, it's focused on knowledge, and it has a measuring system that is skewed, as Derry mentioned. So I do think education needs to shift towards relationship. We need to learn how to relate in those three levels at least. Actually, in the recent work I did with the Conscious Food System Alliance, we expanded those levels to our relationship to self, our relationship to kin and family, our relationship to community, our relationship to nature, and those four being our subject to subject relationships, and then our relationship to ancestrality and sacred and sacredness, which is our relationship to time. So understanding our ancestors, but also how we become ancestors of future generations. And then our relationship to agency, how we transport all these relations into action. But this is critical because this should be the main focus of education and learning in order to move forth. So part of what we're doing is really bringing, first of all, as a bridge, the ideas of the role that nature needs to play in education systems, and softening the borders between approaches and pedagogies through a global narrative shift. So I do think structural changes need to happen, but clearly those don't happen very quickly. So we've realized that, the stories we tell shape the world we live in, and also the world we live in reinforce and shape the stories we tell. So we need to break in those two places. So part of what we're doing is really focusing on how we can tell new stories of learning and engaging in order to start shifting the structures that actually serve for that. And that's happening right now with IUCN. As I mentioned, there's over 180 organizations that are partnering already, including UNESCO and a lot of the UN organizations. So it's very interesting because they're starting to at least allow the fringes to get blurred, which is really important in this narrative shift of the education system. And I do think, health plays a key role. So when we talk about nature-based education, we have framed it as nature-based education for planetary health. And health being a condition of vitality, the capacity to generate and maintain and increase vitality of systems, and systems that are all encompassing of all life. So I do think that's where we really need to focus on how the shifts that we do in not only in education, but in the way we are living in our approaches from globalized to bioregional and localized, all these shifts that need to occur need to really have at the center, obviously, nature as a force, because we are nature, but, bringing vitality to living systems or to our nature. We need to bring vitality, and that's bringing health ultimately, because if we're able to bring vitality, we bring healing conditions. I think illness and what we're going to see are just manifestations of that disruption of vitality, and that's degenerative systems. So part of it, and in the work we're doing with Regenerative Colombia and other areas in the bioregional weaving labs and different projects we have, is really looking at elements of transition from local lenses and bioregional lenses, and seeing how, transitions of the superficial and the deep components of regenerative, let's say, cultures need to be embraced to increase local health. And if we look at it, that's where each of us has capacity really to influence in our day-to-day action. So if we, each of the people that are here gathered, are creating local health, and if we add millions of individuals creating local health, ultimately we have planetary health. And that's definitely one way of seeing it. It's one dimension that needs to be activated. At the same time, the global narratives need to shift. And that's why we're working in narratives. Right now, we've worked with narratives of education, understanding not only nature-based education, but also education for regeneration, and the role of early childhood and neuroscience in building systems that can actually sense much better, much quicker, and understand systems without having to, go through everything that we're teaching them currently in schools, but actually understand and learn how to sense since they're very little. We're changing narratives, education, governance, and narratives to Earth governance systems, leadership towards, regenerative and emergent leadership systems. So I think narratives are key. Climate narratives based on living systems, biodiversity narratives, because we need to fragment, at least in the modern society. But we need to find narratives that actually focus to a place of commonness. Because if we really look at it from, up high, climate change is entangled with biodiversity loss. It's entangled with human health. It's entangled with everything else. We are entangled beings, and we need to embrace entanglements with joy and love and openness. And I think that's where resonance will really manifest as we, realize this.
And I'm imagining we can continue this conversation for much longer, Luis. I really start to get even more hungry for more questions to explore this further. But I think this leaves us with enough full food for thinking how to these central ideas of we are nature, that health is the focus of our collective action, the health that goes beyond the individual health and sort of embraces all multidimensional aspects of it. This I think there is a powerful points of focus that and your idea of bringing in the common narrative that will propel this forward, I think is really essential. So discovering this narrative is perhaps part of our collective journey. And thank you for supporting us on this, Luis. So with that, we need to close now. We're a little bit beyond our time, but I think it was a few more minutes staying online was really worth it. We would like to thank you, Luis, for being today with us. Thank you, everyone who participated. Thank you for your questions and your deep thoughts and sharing that you did in the chat. This talks is a monthly event, so we'll have one more talk before the end of the year, and I hope this will sort of evolve on what you, Luis, are discussing, because we want to have a talk on the planetary boundaries and what kind of approaches can be used to work with like more, let's say, obvious the practice and the deeper levels of bringing the planetary, like our collective practice, our collective being back into these planetary boundaries condition, respecting the planetary boundaries. So that will be the scope of our conversation before the end of the year. And yes, we are having the event that will happen in February, and we hope to see you, Luis, as one of speakers, and some people in this room perhaps will also be invited as speakers, and other people will be invited as co-creators, participants of this, what we call Earth Regenerator Summit, because we are all here for learning how to regenerate Earth. Kriton, any last comment?
Pavel, just one thing, I left links to a little paper we released on COP28 associated to nature-based education for planetary health. And this was a technical brief released by IUCN. So it was the first time we were able to bridge that scientific conservation kind of capsule towards something broader, and bringing nature-based education into it is one way. So just wanted to share that, and please feel free to connect through LinkedIn. I left my LinkedIn.
Yeah, and I would like also to thank you, Luis, and everyone for being here and having this very fruitful discussion. The question that I will not make, I will just use it to close, is because there's this growing feeling of frustration, is it too late to change everything? And I think there is always later, and there is always, we can also be too later and too later, and whoever had these discussions in the past on various issues can be all social issues. It can get even worse if you act in 5 years, or if you act in 10 years, or in 20, or in 1 century. That's why we're here, because we believe that we can act now and change everything. So with this thought in mind, I would like to thank you very much, and wish you all a good afternoon.
Thank you, Kriton and Pavel.
Thank you, and see you.
Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.